Listen closely, for the tale you're about to hear will leave a permanent mark on your soul. On a night so bitter that even the coyotes cease their howls, a desperate Apache widow dragged herself through a killing blizzard with her 2 young children, certain she would not live to see the dawn. But when she finally collapsed at the door of a lonely rancher and breathed the words, "Save my children," his reply shattered every expectation the frontier had ever known. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of survival, heart, and destiny, make sure you subscribe, share your thoughts below, and ring the bell. Now let's begin. The storm was a wild beast, screaming across the barren plains, tearing at the land with icy teeth. Snow fell not as flakes, but as frozen needles, stinging the air and burying the world in a deep, white tomb. Yet, in that pitiless, frozen hell, one figure refused to fall. Anaya's breath crystallized the moment it left her lips as she staggered blindly, clutching her 2 small, freezing children against her tattered clothes. Her daughter's grip was like stone. Her son's whimpers were faint, ghostly things. The wind sought to claim them. The darkness conspired to erase them. But a mother's will is a force of nature all its own. She would not yield, not until she found sanctuary for her babies. Her legs betrayed her, gone numb and leaden, yet she forced them onward, pulling her children with a strength drawn from a well of pure love. Just days before, outlaws at Torture Village murdered her husband and left her with nothing but ashes and an unwritten vow: walk or they will die. No food, no fire, no hope, only an endless, white void in every direction. The children were brave. Her little girl hummed a soft song to calm her brother, but their tiny tracks vanished behind them, swallowed by the hungry snow. Anaya felt the world narrowing, her sight fading. Her body shook with every agonizing step. She could feel her own heart faltering, each pulse a labored drumbeat counting down her final moments. She knew the ancestors were near. She knew her own journey was ending, but she held on to one truth, a single, blazing certainty that outshone all the cold and the fear. Her children would not follow her into the long night. She searched the endless, white fury with failing eyes, pleading silently to any spirit that might be listening for one final sign, one last trail, one last ember of hope, just something, anything, that could save the 2 small souls tethered to life by a thread beside her. And then she saw it, a faint, golden flicker cutting a hole in the blizzard's gray heart. A lantern, a fire, a home. Shaking so violently her teeth chattered, she forced her deadened legs into a stumbling run, half dragging her children toward that impossible glow. Her breath tore from her lungs in ragged gasps. Her knees threatened to give way with every step, but she pushed onward, a ghost driven by a final desperate purpose, until her numb, frozen hand finally struck the weathered wood of a small ranch door, half lost to the drifting snow. She knocked, a weak, thumping sound, desperate and nearly silent. It was the very last of her strength. Her children trembled against her, their small bodies barely able to stand. Inside, Elias sat alone beside the hearth, sharpening the same old knife he'd sharpened every night for 3 long years, since the fever took Sarah. The ranch was a tomb of silence, a place of shadows the firelight could never hope to fill. He endured each day only because the emptiness of living was a quieter pain than the thought of joining her in the ground. The knock at the door startled him. It was too soft, too frail to belong to any man with ill intent. Taking his rifle from its peg, he moved to the door and opened it slowly. The sight froze him where he stood. A starving woman, her strength spent, collapsed forward into the space between them. 2 half-frozen children clung to her legs like wilted leaves in a gale. Her lips, chapped and blue, trembled as she tried to form words. Her voice cracked, a painful, broken whisper that would haunt him for years. "Please take my children." Elias stared, utterly stunned by the plea. She wasn't asking for food, for warmth, for shelter for herself. She was asking him to save her children because she believed, with every fiber of her being, that she would not live long enough to do it herself. The sheer, terrifying weight of that love struck him deeper than any bullet ever could. The children looked up at him with hollow, ancient eyes, their faces the very portrait of a fear no child should ever know. In that single, frozen heartbeat, Elias understood everything. He lowered the rifle immediately. "Not just them," he said, his voice rough as he stepped out into the biting snow. "All of you." The woman's knees buckled completely then, and before she could hit the ground, Elias caught her, his own strong arms wrapping around her frail, shivering frame. He lifted her inside, a bundle of ice and bone, and wrapped her in every blanket he owned. He settled the children near the roaring fire, their small bodies shaking so violently he stoked the flames until they roared, warming stones in the embers, boiling water, cooking the last of his salted meat and beans. He had little, but he gave everything. He worked through the entire night, a man possessed, refusing to rest, refusing to let the Reaper claim the family fate had so brutally deposited on his doorstep. By dawn, the storm's fury had calmed to a gentle hush. Anaya woke slowly, the fire's warmth a strange, forgotten feeling on her skin. Her children slept soundly beside her, their breathing deep and steady. Alive. Elias sat on a stool nearby, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, watching over them like a silent, weary sentinel. When she tried to sit up, he was there in an instant, a steadying hand on her arm. She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his, trying to comprehend why a stranger, a man who owed her nothing, had fought so fiercely through the night. Elias simply said, "You needed help." But the gravity in his voice told a deeper story. He had saved more than just their lives that night. For days, they remained snowed in together, the white world piling up outside the windows. Elias fed the children, mended their torn clothing with rough, patient stitches, and taught them simple chores to calm their frightened minds. The house, once a cavern of suffocating silence, began to fill with a soft scuff of small feet and hesitant, musical giggles. Anaya regained her strength piece by piece, helping Elias where she could, watching him with a gratitude too vast for words. Something unspoken began to grow in the quiet spaces between them. A gentle connection, not born of romance, but forged in the fires of survival, courage, and a shared, profound loneliness. On the fifth morning, the wind finally fell silent. The world outside was a pristine, white blanket. Elias stepped onto the porch to survey the ranch. But the moment his eyes scanned the distant ridge, his blood ran cold. 3 riders were coming, and coming fast. Men from the nearby settlement. He knew their faces. They weren't friendly. They weren't patient. And they did not tolerate Apache on what they considered their land. Elias's grip on his rifle tightened until his knuckles were white. Inside the house, Anaya felt the shift in the air, a sudden, cold ripple of danger. She gathered her children to her heart hammering against her ribs. Their safety, their fragile new future, everything hung in the balance once more. The men dismounted with hard, suspicious eyes. The lead rider, a thick-set man with a scar carving through his cheek, leaned forward and spat a stream of tobacco into the pristine snow. "Cain," he said, his voice as cold as the air. "Heard you got a squaw in your house." Elias didn't blink. He didn't move. He didn't step aside. He just stood tall on his porch, rifle held ready, his body a solid wall between the threat and his doorway. The men exchanged knowing smirks, scenting trouble like hounds. But Elias Cain's voice, when it came, was strong, unshaking, powerful enough to cut through the frigid quiet. "What happens under my roof," he stated, "ain't your business." The riders glared, their hands drifting closer to the pistols on their hips, preparing to force the issue. And just like that, the world balanced on a knife's edge. 1 second from violence, 1 heartbeat from destiny. For a long, tense moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The 3 riders stared at Elias like wolves circling a lone stag. Behind him, inside the ranch house, Anaya held her children close, their small fingers clutching her dress. She could hear the voices outside, the timbre of threat as familiar to her as the wind. She had seen men like these before, hard, cruel, their eyes hungry for dominance. She whispered to her children to stay quiet, stay low, stay perfectly still. A single sound, 1 wrong breath, could shatter the fragile peace Elias was fighting to hold. The scarred rider stepped forward, a mocking grin twisting his features. "You're harboring savage," he declared, as if stating an obvious crime. Elias didn't answer with words at first. He simply shifted the rifle in his hands, a subtle, deliberate motion that made the morning sun glint coldly off the steel barrel. The rider's grin faded, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Cain, you're a poor man living on borrowed luck. Don't throw away what little you've got left over some strays." Elias felt the anger then, a clean, hot fire rising in his chest. Strays. That's all they saw. That's all Anaya and her children were to them. He stepped forward to the very edge of the porch, the rifle held firm but not yet aimed. His voice, when it came, was calm, deep, and carried the weight of the land itself. "They're under my roof," he said. "That makes them my responsibility." The scarred rider spat again, the moisture staining the white snow. "Your responsibility or your problem?" Elias didn't flinch. "Depends on how peaceful you ride off this property." The men exchanged a look of pure frustration. They had expected fear, submission. They found none. Elias Cain had nothing. No wealth, no powerful allies, no influence. But what he possessed was a spine of iron, the kind that doesn't bend, even when the whole world tries to break it. The second rider, younger and jumpier, let his hand drift to the revolver on his hip. "We're not leaving till we see what's inside." Elias raised the rifle then, not to shoot, but to draw a line in the very air between them. A silent, unmistakable reminder that to step forward was to cross a boundary from which there was no return. The tension thickened, coiling in the quiet, until even the wind seemed to die in reverence. Then the scarred rider lifted a hand, stopping the younger man. He assessed Elias, the unyielding stance, the steady hands, the fire in his eyes. "Fine," he growled, the word a bitter concession. "Keep your pets. But if anything goes missing in town, if there's any trouble at all, we'll know exactly who to blame." Elias held his ground, a statue on his own land, until the men reluctantly mounted their horses and rode away, their figures slowly swallowed by the vast, white horizon. Only when the last echo of a hoofbeat faded into silence did Elias allow himself to exhale, a long, shaky breath he felt he'd been holding for an eternity. His hands trembled, not from fear of the men, but from the chilling vision of what could have happened if they had called his bluff. He walked back inside, the warmth of the house a stark contrast to the cold confrontation. Anaya was waiting for him near the table, her eyes wide with a mixture of worry and something else, something deeper and more profound. "You protected us," she whispered, the words filled with awe. Again. Her daughter then broke from her side and rushed to Elias, wrapping her small arms around his legs with surprising force. Her small voice was cracked with emotion as she looked up at him. "I was so scared they'd hurt you." Elias's heart clenched. He knelt down, his large, calloused hand coming to rest gently on her small shoulder. "I'm not letting anything happen to any of you," he vowed, his voice soft but absolute. "Not ever." Over the following days, the world outside began to soften as winter's grip slowly loosened. Snow melted into muddy patches, the horses in the barn regained their spirit, and the sky itself seemed to brighten with the promise of a new season. Inside the ranch, life began to shift in a quieter, more profound way. Anaya started to shoulder the chores Elias had always borne alone. She cooked meals, mended his worn-out clothes, swept the floors, and even helped feed the animals. Her presence brought a tangible warmth into the house that had been absent for years. Her children became his shadows, learning to ride the gentle mare, to coil a rope, to gather kindling for the fire, their laughter ringing out in a way it hadn't since they lost their father. Elias felt something long dormant stirring within him, something he thought had died and been buried with his wife. A sense of belonging, a purpose, the profound feeling of being needed. Anaya noticed the change, too. Sometimes she would catch him watching her as she worked, his eyes holding a softness, a warmth he couldn't yet put into words. And sometimes she would watch him, marveling at how a man so weathered by loss could still possess such a gentle, steadfast heart. Their conversations by the fire grew longer, more comfortable. Their silences were no longer empty, but filled with a quiet understanding. Their hearts, scarred and cautious, grew closer not by force or design, but because survival had patiently, tenderly, and unavoidably woven their lives into a single, stronger thread. One evening, as the sun bled gold and purple across the horizon, Anaya found Elias behind the barn, repairing a broken section of fence. She approached him slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Elias," she began, her voice soft but clear. "You saved my life. You saved my children. I have nothing of value to give you in return." Elias looked up from his work, meeting her gaze with a warmth that made her breath catch. "You don't owe me a thing, Anaya." She took a step closer, her voice trembling with the weight of her hope. "But I want to stay," she whispered. "If you'll have us." The hammer slipped from Elias's hand, thudding softly into the dirt. The children, who had been watching from the barn doorway, held their breath, their eyes shining with a desperate, hopeful light. For a moment, Elias was speechless, his heart pounding with a feeling so foreign and so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with an emotion he no longer fought. "This is your home now," he said, the words a solemn promise. "All of you." Anaya's breath hitched in her throat. Her daughter broke into a radiant smile. Her son let out a happy cry and ran to Elias, wrapping his small arms around the man's leg in a fierce, accepting hug. And in that simple, profound moment, something old and broken deep inside Elias Cain finally, completely healed. There were no longer 4 lost souls stranded by a storm. They were becoming a family, a tapestry woven from the threads of fate, compassion, and the quiet bravery to open a heart once shattered by grief. Spring arrived in a slow, gentle thaw, painting the hard plains with strokes of new green. The ranch itself seemed to awaken, to breathe deeper, as if the very land was revitalized the moment they all chose to remain. Elias showed the children how to turn the earth and plant their first garden. Anaya cooked simple meals that filled the cabin with aromas that spoke of a warmth Elias had long forgotten. Each day dawned brighter, felt stronger, and was filled with a purpose that made his life feel whole. The town, once a source of suspicion and threat, learned to keep its distance, for a simple reason. Elias Cain was no longer a man with nothing to lose. He had everything to protect. A woman who saw the goodness in his quiet ways. Children who looked at him as their guardian. A family forged in the coldest of fires, built from ashes and ice. The day came when Elias rode into town for supplies. The same scarred rider approached him, but this time his eyes held a different kind of fire. Respect. "You stood your ground," the man stated, his tone grudging but honest. Not many would have. Elias didn't respond with arrogance, only with a quiet, unshakable certainty. "They're my family." The rider gave a single, slow nod and walked away. For the first time since the blizzard had screamed at his door, Elias felt the world around him settle, recognize, and finally accept the life he had built. The fight was truly over. The danger had passed. What remained was a peace he never dreamed he would feel again. That evening, when he returned home, Anaya was waiting on the porch. She greeted him with a shy smile that warmed him from the inside out, more than any hearth ever could. The children spilled from the house, running to him and shouting his name with a joy that was its own kind of music. Elias stepped down from his horse, his heart so full it ached, his voice soft with emotion. "I'm home," he said, and for the first time in years, he meant it completely. Anaya reached for his hand. He took it, his rough fingers lacing with hers. Together, they stood watching the sunset wash the ranch in a deep, abiding gold. A new beginning, a new life, a family born from the most unforgiving winter the frontier could muster. And not one of them would ever have to face the darkness alone again.